I did read the housing minister letter they just sent us for the extension, but that's got nothing to do with Brookville, right?
Well, they had UBCM today, they've got 1,000.
Oh,
They said they'll get us a letter by the end of the week, but
double good news.
yeah. But it seems like it's just whatever they can get done. Anything that they think might result in votes.
Oh, she dropped her name tag. Okay. The lady with the gray pantsuit. I know, I saw that on TikTok. Last time they gave us that. Yeah.
Any port in the storm. Good afternoon. We'll call the General Purposes Committee meeting to order. May I have a motion on the minutes? Discussion, all those in favor, votes carried. We'll start off the meeting with a presentation by BC Hydro. I am told that, are they here? Okay, come on forward. Come on forward and introduce yourselves. And we've all got your, I think this is your PowerPoint presentation.
Do the mics auto? Oh,
Yep.
they are automatically turned on. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Diana Stevenson, and I serve as Senior Vice President of Customer and Corporate Affairs for BC Hydro. Presenting with me today is Ajay Kumar, who is our Vice President of Asset Planning. Ajay is responsible for implementing BC Hydro's integrated planning methodologies and developing both our short and our long-term capital plans and maintenance plans. That includes both our generation, transmission, and distribution systems across the province. He also works diligently to ensure our asset management practices are aligned with best practices, And his group is also responsible for developing the future grid strategy for our power system and undertaking the planning for load and IPP customers as well. So we essentially have BC Hydro's Chief System Architect with you today to talk about all things power systems and open it up for questions after that.
Thank you, Diana.
Great. There we go. So before we get started, one of the things we wanted to recognize is we really are in the midst of a transition here in British Columbia. In addition to unprecedented population growth, we are seeing differences in how customers are choosing to use electricity and energy over the long term. So one of the things you're going to be hearing about us today is not only how we're taking care of the system, but how we're also planning for future need. Right now, electrification or the ability to use our clean electricity here in British Columbia is one of the most available pathways for customers who are looking to fuel switch. But one of the underlying requirements that we're really starting to see is the actual population growth and the fact that a number of our infrastructure pieces across the province are really coming due for reinvestment, for maintenance, refurbishment. So what you'll hear us talking about with respect to our capital plan is the ability for us to not only sustain the assets we have, but also to grow and add to the system as well.
So as Diana mentioned, we are facing an unprecedented load growth from the electrification standpoint. And the starting point of our planning is always looking at the load forecast. So this slide actually shows the overall provincial load forecast that BC Hydro has seen over the last 10 years. And you see that's fairly flat. And that's very typical for most of the utilities that we've seen in North America because energy efficiency has been able to keep up with any kind of load growth that's happened in BC as well as in North America. But the picture quite changes as you start looking into the future. And those are the dotted lines that show that the overall load in BC is actually going to be increasing quite substantially in the next 10 to 15 years. And there are two implications when the load grows like that. One is on the generation side, one is on the infrastructure side. So let's talk about generation. To meet this load growth, we are actually in the midst of moving forward with the Site C dam, which is going to add about 8% to our overall energy mix. And that allows us to meet the future loads in the province. And the in-service date for Site C is end of next year, and we are on track for that in-service date. In addition to Site C, we are also looking at Clean Power Call. These are the independent power producers that produce power and inject that into our system. The last time we had a call was almost 15 years ago. And given the electrification focus that we have right now in the province, we feel that in addition to Site C, we also have to move forward with the IPP generation. So that call is currently underway. We've got a lot of response from the IPP developers around this. And at the end of this year, we are going to be making agreements with them in terms of securing additional energy. And that's about 3,000 gigawatt hours, which turns to be about 5% of the overall provincial need. In addition to generation, we also have an energy efficiency program. And the reason why the load forecast was flat over the last 10, 15 years is because our energy efficiency program actually allows us to offset any increases that we've seen. We are spending almost $700 million over the next 3 years on energy efficiency programs that will allow us to reduce the load that we see on our system in addition to all the electrification needs that are showing up. As you probably know, we came up with a new capital plan recently to address all the electrification needs, and it's about $36 billion, and there's three components to that capital plan. One is the biggest one, which is the sustainment of our existing system, which is about $21 billion. Electrification is driving about $10 billion of additional capital requirements, and then the customer interconnections, which is the third one, which is about $5 billion. And this capital plan is actually updated and reviewed on a yearly basis, and we are in the cycle right now of looking at and developing our next capital plan. So as I mentioned, one of the components of our capital plan is the customer needs, which was the $5 billion that I talked about. As part of that, we are actually looking at how do we connect our customers. And our distribution extension policy actually was developed in 2007. And as electrification is happening, we feel that it's time for us to review and change that policy to align with what the requirements from our customers are. So currently, we have a new policy that has been put forward to the Commission, and we are going through a process where we hope we'll be able to finalize that policy by the end of the year so we can start implementing that as we go forward. If you look at the regional focus in the Lower Mainland, this is something that exercise we took last year, where we wanted to find out where the growth is happening in Lower Mainland. And those red triangles, ellipses, circles that you see on this Lower Mainland map show where we are starting to see some capacity concerns for our system. And our capital plan is aligned to address those as we go forward in the next 10 years. In terms of Richmond, there are 4 substations that actually serve the community over here, and those are shown by the red dots that you see, the small ones. At the bottom, you see Steveston, which is our substation that we are expanding. At the top, you see Canby on the right-hand side, and then Kid2 and Sea Island. So those are the 4 substations that currently serve the community of Richmond, and there's ample capacity that we have been able to actually plan for to address the next 10 years requirements in the city.
Great. So there's a number of ways that we're looking forward in terms of how we support our customers. So you've heard us talk about sort of conservation and load management and the participation of our customers in a number of really exciting programs. We've introduced a number of programs over the past year in particular. We're looking at rate design. We're looking at a whole bunch of different tools to focus on that. We're also increasingly focused on sharing community and infrastructure plans. One of the big relationships in the journey of reinvesting in our electricity system is very much working with municipalities such as yourself and making sure we're really taking a stronger partnership approach. We're also very committed to decreasing our own processes and the overall timelines for the time it takes to get infrastructure in the ground. So for the past 3 decades, we've been quite focused on driving those consumer programs and making sure we've got things available to customers. And over the last year in particular, one of the things that we've really focused on is starting to reach out and have very deep and meaningful conversations with different municipalities about the infrastructure needs in their particular communities. We think there's a really rich sort of environment out there to start having more distribution level and more city level conversations about how we can coordinate infrastructure and then particular growth hotspots that you just saw Ajay refer to in your own community. That's something we're quite prepared to take on as well. So I think with that, we would be very happy to answer any additional questions. We know we want to stay on time.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll go first of all to Councillor McNulty. Bill.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming. A great presentation, but actually very short in content from my perspective. It's great to see how you're going to do this, and I'm curious with climate change and what have you, and the emphasis on electricity, et cetera. What is the increased cost projection for the next 10 years to the customer? You can't do it all by saving in terms of efficiencies, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Do you have a plan for that, or have we talked about that?
Yeah.
Because that's the bottom line with the taxpayer.
Yes, so that is a very good question. One of the things that we will be going before the commission in 2025 is our next revenue requirements application. And what that application will do is sort of set out what the cost base looks like and what the investment structure is looking like as well. So that's when that information will be available.
Do we export power anywhere?
Yes, we do, to the US and to the Alberta.
Are we going to be able to ever to keep that down, reclaim that power back so that the power is used in British Columbia as opposed to the United States?
Yeah, I think it all depends on the situation because sometimes we need to import power and sometimes we have to export power. That because we have generation that is on reservoirs, we are able to actually store that energy when we need to, and sometimes we can import power from the US at a much more effective rate. So that has been a hallmark of our interties with the US as well with Alberta, and it has allowed us to actually have a positive impact from a financial standpoint for our ratepayers. So those interties are actually very critical for us, and we use them judiciously to arbitrage our imports and exports.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer. It would be nice to see that we can generate our own and become self-sufficient and not have to worry about importing elsewhere and depending on somebody else for what they've got. You mentioned conservation, working with the municipalities, et cetera. What specifically can those of us around the table expect from you in terms of requests to help them become that partner?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think there's a couple of layers. We first and foremost recognize that you actually represent the citizens of Richmond, and the citizens of Richmond are truly our customers. So I think making sure we're doing a good job of ensuring that you know what offers are in market, especially for citizens, people who want to take advantage, they want to manage their own energy footprint. We've got some really exciting products that are out now for folks who drive EVs and managing their EV power management within their home environment. We've also just recently introduced solar and battery rebates for the first time here in British Columbia. So what we can do is give you a little bit of a packet of information that you're free and welcome to spend with your citizens. I think moving up now to the full municipal layer, I know we have a working relationship with the City of Richmond. There's a number of different things that we tackle. There are actually a few case studies that we're going to be going through at the UBCM conference that's happening this week, where we're starting to really dig in with some of these local communities and have really meaningful conversations about how we can better parallel some of the planning structures. Right now, we're in some pretty deep chats with the City of Vancouver, for example, to see how we can streamline things between our two organizations, and that would be something always of interest with Richmond as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. A few questions. Thanks for being here, and a couple questions about your slides, and then a few others. So first, your regional view of anticipated growth. The only one that's actually in Richmond is on Sea Island, and there's a small community there, Burkeville. I don't think that's what you're talking about, expanding. Are you talking about the airport operations?
Yeah, so this map actually shows where we have capacity requirements on the system as a result of load growth. If load growth is happening in other parts where we have enough capacity, that doesn't show up here, and that is the case for Richmond. If you look at the 3 substations that I talked about on that map, currently we have a couple of projects that are shown on the next slide, where we are expanding Steveston, we are also expanding KID 2. That allows us that capacity that we need to serve that. So that's the reason why it doesn't show up on the lower mainland, because we already have projects underway, and the capacity that we have currently is more than sufficient for what we see over the next 10, 15 years in Richmond, even with electrification.
Great, I appreciate that. The second question with your maps is the one that's showing some of Richmond. Note that you have cut off the East Richmond, the Hamilton neighborhood, that's closer to Queensborough. What's the substation that supplies that area?
So we have Cambie substation that allows us to serve that area as far as that load growth is concerned.
Okay, my first question in relation to that specifically is, I live out in Hamilton. I haven't been like some of the people out there for 30 plus years, but many have said that there's definitely a trend in more power outages, and not just the fact that there's an outage, but the frequency of them and the duration of them. There was just one a few weeks ago that lasted for 21 hours, Friday at 4 p.m. to 1 hours later. This impacts people who are hooked up to CPAP machines at night, and many other examples. And it's just kind of discerning that in urban setting that it takes so long for power to get back. Is there potential for a secondary routing of electricity would that improve the consistent service?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start off with some reliability statistics for Richmond and compare that against the system. So if you look at the number of interruptions in Richmond, it's about 1 interruption a year. And our system average is about 1.56. So your overall frequency of outages is actually better than the system average. If you look at our duration of outage, Richmond has 2.4 hours per interruption. The system average is 3.56. So I think on both those fronts, Richmond's reliability actually compares very favorably against the system numbers that we see. With respect to the outages that you talked about, I don't have the specific of that outage, but generally what we are facing on the system is that it's an aging infrastructure. And sometimes we have to replace poles. In my neighborhood, I know I live in East Vancouver, we had 2 consecutive long outages, and that was because we were replacing poles. And one of the things that Hydro has done recently is we used to have the practice of actually replacing our infrastructure when it's energized. And what we found is that's a big safety concern for not only our workers, but also for public. So we've actually now moved away from energized maintenance to actually planned maintenance, where we take out the infrastructure for a period of time to allow our crews to safely replace the infrastructure. And that is a reflection of the fact that the infrastructure is aging, and we need to replace our poles effectively and making sure that the safety is not compromised. The last thing I would say is we constantly look at the reliability of all our 1,400 distribution feeders. There's about 53 in Richmond, but overall we have about 1,400. And one of our things that we do as a team is we look at the worst performing feeders all across the system, and we try to figure out what's happening from a reliability standpoint. And we always analyze it to make sure that we are able to improve reliability as we go forward. And part of the things that causes unreliability is vegetation. And we've actually increased our vegetation program threefolds over the last 4 or 5 years to make sure that we can have a positive impact from a reliability standpoint, because trees are one of the biggest offenders when it comes to reliability of the system.
Thank you. My final question is kind of a follow-up to that. Does BC Hydro hold anyone liable if they are clearly at fault of a power outage? And then is there any compensation ever given to the public or businesses that have paid all their staff but have to send them home? Like, is there any compensation or liability?
Yeah, so the way in which it's handled from a power system perspective is it's actually set out in our base terms and conditions in terms of, and that's fully regulated by the commission. So right now we do give a fair amount of notice when it's a planned outage in particular to make sure customers can make different arrangements. In the event that there is a power system disruption, we typically do not compensate for unexpected events, but we do work very hard, obviously, to get the power back online and try to stay as strong as we can in our communications while we're doing it.
Thanks.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much for coming today. I do appreciate it. I just want to make sure I got this correctly. When you were referring to the substation distribution projects in Richmond, you said that the capacity is more than we need for the next 10 to 15 years. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the current load in Richmond is about 361 megawatts, or MVA, we call it, MVA. And the future load is expected to be about 450 MVA by F33. We call it financial 33, but it's about 8-9 years. The current capacity that we have in the system is 433 MVA, and with those projects that we shared in those slides, the capacity is actually going to increase to 583. So with these two projects that I mentioned at Stevenson and Gate 2, there's enough capacity for us to serve the load in Richmond over the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay, well then maybe you can clear up something for me.
Sure.
I've been speaking to a number of builders who have been building beautiful homes in Richmond, and they come with everything from heat exchangers, electric stoves, electric furnace, electric hot water, electric car charger, electric fireplace. They need a 400-watt system. They can't get it. When they call Hydro to get hookup, they are told, well, sorry, we don't have that capacity. Now, if you want to give us $30,000 to $60,000 to upgrade the system, we can find that capacity for you.
Yeah, so the capacity numbers that I talked about are at a system level, which is basically anywhere from the transmission to the substations to the distribution feeders. When it's the individual customer that has to connect, that becomes a very micro-focused requirement that we have to look at. So the capacity at the system level might be available, but depending on where the actual development is happening, we may have to extend our system to that point, or we may have to increase the amps that have to flow through that system. So I think what you're hearing from them is the fact that the individual interconnection to the system requires us to upgrade that point of interconnection, and that requires us to increase that capacity in that area. And as I said, that the distribution extension policy that we are in the midst of looking at from a regulatory standpoint, it was put together in 2007. And we know that there are elements of that need to be revisited, and we've actually put forward a fairly strong case for changing the contribution that BC Hydro makes towards those costs that the builders are incurring or the customers are incurring. And also we've eliminated what's called the system improvement. So a lot of times when the customers interact or connect to the system, sometimes there's upstream impact on the system, on the distribution system. So that is going to be something that Hydro is going to be funding going forward. But the actual connection to the new service is still the requirement from and has to be paid by the developers or the customers.
Well,
so that, I think the policy is going to go a long way in reducing the timelines, as well as the contribution from BC Hydro is going to go towards offsetting those costs.
Well, you can imagine how shocking it is to a homeowner that's hired a builder to find out that they simply can't get the service that we all encourage them, to go for the electric everything so that you can have less greenhouse gases. So they're trying to do the right thing, but ultimately it's hitting them very hard in the pocketbook. Can you see a way forward, given that you said these are minor situations that are not that common, where you could subsidize them as opposed to charging them?
So I think this, as I mentioned, if you look at the contributions that we are putting towards these interconnection requests, those are going up in our new extension policy. And once that is approved, that will increase the contribution that BC Hydro will be making towards those connections. And also, we'll be doing away with the system improvement costs, which were quite a significant requirement. The third thing I would say is, as those connections happen, in future, if other customers come and take advantage of that infrastructure, there's actually a refund that Hydro will be providing to those customers if someone else is able to use that infrastructure. That opportunity wasn't there before. So that's an automatic system that we are implementing, where if someone is paying for the first connection to a certain area, then additional customers that would actually provide that refund that'll go towards those initial customers. So there's a number of changes we are making to our extension policy towards
Will that be retroactive to the people that have paid already?
that. I don't know. I think we'll have to get back to you on
Could
that.
you please? Yeah. And I just, the frustration level, I mean, I wonder, is there a way for a builder to contact Hydro in advance of designing and building their house to find out whether they're one of the unlucky ones that has to pay this extra 30 to 60,000?
We would definitely recommend that as soon as somebody is looking at any form of development, one of the first calls to be made should be to your utilities, whether it's power, whether it's water, whatever the case might be. I think we all know that we're living in the day and age where those dialogues, as early as possible, are quite important. One of the things in the tools I think we could give you to share with your constituents is a status update on our distribution extension policy, so people understand what we put forward to the BC Utilities Commission for review, and then the timing of when that would come out as well. So we can make sure you've got a little bit more information about the fact that we recognize some of our policies do need to be modernized to reflect the fact that there are upgrades required now that maybe weren't done in the past.
Well, I look forward to hearing back.
I just want to share some stats with you because you talked about the 400 amp connection. So only 7% of the connections are actually 400 amps and above of all the interconnections that we get on our system. Of those 7%, 80% of those costs are less than 25,000. So a very small portion of those costs actually are higher than that 25,000. So those are very unique circumstances that we have to look at because the request could be in an area where we may not have that distribution feeder that is extending to that. So I think overall, it's a very small proportion of the cost or the requests that go to that 400 amps. And even of those, majority of them are under $25,000.
Oh, okay, so I just have to ask one follow-up question then. I was told by a builder that it's either 100, 200, or 400, that there was a jump between 2 and 4, and that 300 was not available.
Sorry, which one was not?
Okay, for amperage service to a house. In the old days, we got 100 amp service, then we started building houses with 200 amp service, but now it's either 200 or 400, that there isn't 300.
Yeah, I think that will be on a case-by-case basis, so we'll have to follow up and find out if you can give us the specifics of that case. We can look into it with our distribution design team and find out what the specifics were.
Okay.
Councillor Hobbs.
Thanks, and through the chair. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the information. A couple of questions from a layperson's perspective. You talked about, and I've read a little bit about power importation to BC and our exports as well. So when we import power, I mean, when we export it, we're exporting clean hydroelectric power. When we import it, how is that energy created? Because I understand it comes from primarily both Alberta and the States. How is that power generated?
Yeah, so in the Pacific Northwest, there's a fairly remarkable story about the, I would say, the growing greening of the grid south of the border. There's also a fairly remarkable story in our neighbors to the side of us with Alberta, where they have actually retired all of their coal assets and they're on a decarbonization journey as well. So wherever possible, we do import using sort of clean standards and making sure that's available. At other times, we do import from a mix of whatever is available on the market. That tends to be the way the market works.
And that combination of things would include fossil fuels like gas, correct?
It really would depend on the time of day, and it would be dependent on sort of the type of transaction that we're doing.
Yeah, generally when we look at importing, that's when the US is actually high on wind and solar.
Yeah.
So I would say that the correlation between when we are importing versus renewables is quite high. Because that's when we can turn down our reservoirs and take advantage of the renewables because they can't turn it down. So they're looking at someone to actually buy that energy. So I think the correlation between our composition of when we are looking to import versus the renewables is quite significant.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple more quick ones. I read something that indicated the amount of power generated for all the electrical needs within BC, like residential, commercial, industrial. And it was quite a low number, actually. I remember what it was, but I'm curious if you have a different number, can tell me what is the total electrification kind of generation that is done by hydro in terms of the province's needs? What percentage?
Maybe we'll talk a little bit about scenarios, because one of the interesting things from an integrated planning perspective of the system is there's multiple futures that can unfold. There's futures where there is a lower uptake on fuel switching, and then there's a higher uptake on fuel switching. And one of the things you'll see in our integrated resource plan is we're actually planning in a way that's quite flexible, and we're able to kind of pivot depending on what we're seeing on the system. I would reassure every citizen, and I would reassure especially the folks here in Richmond, that we are building the system in contemplation of more EVs, more heat pumps. You've got us going out for a call for power. We're talking about a $36 billion capital plan. So I would just encourage you to make sure you're getting as much information as possible from us and from others. We have been there for many, many decades from a power supply perspective, and we will be there in the future. We are planning for those things.
Oh, sure, and yeah.
Yeah.
Just a couple quick ones. I mean, the number I heard was the overall number was about 19% of the total need. Is that?
In BC?
Yeah. for
No,
BC's
that
total needs.
is not true. So if you look at the overall energy that we consume in BC, it's about 55,000 to 60,000 gigawatt hours. And of that, I would say somewhere around 80%, we'll have to confirm that number, is generated in BC. So the imports are actually playing a very small component of it. And if you look at the last 11 years, if I remember the data correctly, we were a net exporter 6 years and importer 5 years. But overall composition of what we generate versus what we import for our residential load or our domestic load is actually a very small figure, not in that range that you just quoted.
Sure, and last one, since we've got you here. Site C. You hear different things in the media and different reports about us requiring basically 2 more Site Cs, and some people even say 3. So that's probably not going to happen. But with Site C, with the power it generates, I've read some things that say, although it's clean power that it generates, the construction of it and everything, it'll take about 100 years to recoup basically the environmental issues that have been incurred with the construction of it. Take about 100 years of clean power generation to recoup those. Is that a kind of an accurate number? And the last thing I'll ask you is there any discussion at all in BC about nuclear power? I know it's very scary and people shy away from it, but other jurisdictions are talking about it, and there's new forms of electrical power, and Gates is working on some of that, I think in Wyoming or someplace. So any comments about that?
So maybe I'll start with the nuclear question, because that's an easy one. Nuclear is actually forbidden by law in BC. So unless the law changes, we cannot pursue, or we or any other developer cannot pursue nuclear. There is technology that's looking at small modular nuclear, and there's been tests that have been done. It looks promising as far as the pilots are concerned, but in BC we cannot pursue that unless the law changes. So I think that's a fairly straightforward. With respect to your question about building Site C, I haven't heard that number about it'll take 100 years to recover from the greenhouse gas impacts or climate change impacts, but I think the same is true for if you look at the renewables. And if you look at the solar panels or the wind turbines, they have to be replaced more frequently than a dam is replaced. So I think our infrastructure is there for almost a century before we have to do anything from a dam standpoint. So, whereas if you look at the solar panels, they have to be recycled more frequently, and the wind turbines also have to be refurbished. So I think from that, I would think that a dam actually provides you with a better option in terms of the capacity that you need. The other thing you have to remember is a lot of these renewables don't have capacity, they only have energy. So when the intermittents are not producing, how do you manage the system? So I think the capacity need on the system that BC has is actually a foundational benefit for BC that we have been enjoying, because we are able to integrate more renewables on our system because of the capacity that the dams provide. And if you look at challenges that we've seen in California as well as in Texas, the amount of renewables that ended up replacing the capacity was huge, and then it created challenges. So from a planning perspective, you always have to look at balancing the renewables against the capacity that the dams are providing. And you can't move forward without having that capacity. And that is a key fundamental tenet of our system, and it has actually stood us very well in the past and in the future.
Great, thanks very much.
Councillor Heed.
Yes, thank you. My questions are not global like his. Mine are related to Richmond because I think that's why you're here. You commented that we have capacity going into the future. And I guess given the fact that we've just gone through some legislative changes which will impact the energy use here in Richmond, my question is, what formula did you use to determine that? Because I never thought we would be in a position where we have adequate capacity within our jurisdiction in order for this increased development that we're anticipating going forward.
Sorry, I'm trying to understand, Councillor, what your question is getting at.
What formula did you use? You mentioned, you gave a word of
Yeah.
300 right now, we're in excess of 400 going forward. So how did you determine that? How did you come up with that, especially in the environment we have right now in this province?
Yeah, so I can maybe give you an overview of how we calculate the capacity. So the capacity is driven by three components. If you look at what's coming into the city are transmission lines. And those are the big transmission, 60 kV and above, that bring the power. And that power comes to what's called substations. And I showed 4 on the map. And those 4 substations become the key for serving the city. And that's where the capacity is calculated, because we need to make sure that the substations have enough capacity for the future. And the capacity on the substation is determined based on the transformers that we have there. So those are the large pieces of equipment that bring the transmission at a higher voltage and steps it down to the distribution voltage. So that capacity of those substations defines what the overall capacity in this. So the numbers that I shared with you are those 4 substations that are absolutely key for electrifying and serving the load, and we have enough capacity over there. The second component of capacity is the distribution lines that come from those substations that come to the residential areas. And we have 53 feeders that come from those 4 substations that I talked about. And even in those feeders, we have enough capacity to meet the future loads. So the numbers that I shared with you are the substation levels as well as on the distribution level. That defines how comfortable we are in terms of serving the load requirements in any area. So this is not just specific to Richmond. They would do the same thing in Vancouver, Surrey, and so forth. So I think that is the planning criteria that we use for figuring out what's required. The other thing I would like to say is, historically, we used to start planning for new feeders when they reached about 75% of their capacity. So that gave us an indication that load is going to be increasing. Recently, we've actually reduced that for the urban settings to 66%. So the moment that feeder hits the 66% at the distribution level, we start thinking in terms of how do we actually now plan the system for us to actually serve the future load. So I think there's a lot of proactive planning that BC Hydro is taking over the last 3 years to anticipate what's happening with electrification, and that gives us the comfort that we are able to serve the future needs in each jurisdiction that we are operating in.
And how far forward?
If you look at our base planning, which is what we call the integrated resource plan, that looks at the overall generation in the province and the load. That's a 20-year horizon. And that was recently approved by the commission after a hiatus of a number of years. And that defines what the next 20-year forecast over the province looks like. Then we take that 20-year plan and we say, each jurisdiction is different. And we start developing a 10-year forecast for Richmond, 10-year forecast for Vancouver at each substation level. So each one of those 4 stations that I talked about has a 10-year forecast going forward in terms of what load growth is going to happen. And that allows us to figure out where we are going to have some capacity concerns. And that becomes our fundamental analysis that we use for figuring out where reinforcements are required.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned that the outages work out to about 1 a year, but do some places have more? You know, we've heard some complaints from some restaurants, and I was out at Tree Island Steel the other day that has their own substation, it turns out. So they're drawing a lot of power, obviously, and maybe because people work there for so long, they think they happen more frequently. But I'm just wondering, does that match with what people are actually think that they're experiencing, or is this averaged out over the whole
Yeah,
population?
so the numbers that I shared with you are actually for the whole city of Richmond that have been averaged out. You're absolutely right. The experience can vary depending on where you live. And depending on what we are doing with the system, if you're replacing poles in that area, sometimes you have to come a couple of 3 times to actually replace those poles. And as I said, our focus has become doing that work planned, which is de-energized it, so that we can actually get that comfort level around the safety. So I think it all depends on which programs are in place. As I said, personally, the area that I live in, for 20 years, we had very little outages. This last year, I had 3 outages, back to back over 3 weekends, because we were replacing poles. So I think it all is very specific. So if you can share with us any details about those outages, we are happy to look into it. But I think it all varies depending on the programs we have in place and the kind of replacement that we are doing in the area to address those concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll let you go now. I'll just add that from my point of view, the kind of questions you've had from the counselors, that's the kind of questions that I'm getting all the time. And the further one, and I realize you're not here to speak about it, but we'll put in a good word. When we build the tunnel, or the province builds that tunnel, we're hoping that Hydro will put those wires under the river, not transmission lines.
Yeah, so we are in active discussions with MOTI on the tunnel design, and that's what's going to dictate what happens with the cables. So that is still something that's being discussed, and because the tunnel design has not been finalized, we are unable to actually have that discussion with MOTI. So that is going to happen very shortly, and the decision around that will be made next year.
Okay, well, think underground.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the next one, which is an application to amend the food primary. Mark Corrado and Victor Duarte, anything to add to your report?
To your worship, I have nothing to add. I'm open to questions.
Okay. You have questions, or someone want to move it? Yes, we're gonna get you. Oh, sorry. Does someone want to move it? Okay, so it's moved and seconded. Councillor Glanders. Just a minute. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just curious, what location is this compared to where the China Pro Enterprises restaurant was 2 weeks ago? Is it the exact same area, or is it a different location in Richmond?
This is a different location this is on number 3 and just above Westminster Highway.
And the other one was closer to Lansdowne?
Through the chair to Councillor Glanders, this is a separate company.
I know.
So the other location, I can get that specific address.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I know it's not affiliated. I just mean if we're approving them here, and then we're approving them there. We didn't get any opposition to the one we did a couple of weeks ago. And I'm just putting it together that perhaps that's a slightly less populated area, or maybe it already has more late night businesses versus this area, because we did receive some letters of opposition. So I'll be hesitant to support this one based on that we did get letters. There's a couple in our package, and there was one that wasn't included because it was anonymous. So I think that I don't want to tread into this if it's going to cause issues in the community. And I'm wondering where this falls into, perhaps if we just put this one off for now, will this restaurant and others in this area be included in the referral? We already have out on how we can increase liquor hours in the certain areas to create a sort of a bit of more of an entertainment district in Richmond. And could we perhaps put this off, and this business would be included in that referral as an overall look, and because we're going to be doing public consultation on that, right?
Mark, can you remind us of that referral?
To your worship, I don't have that specific address at this time, but I can get back to you on the, your worship, the overall referral?
Overall, some kind of referral?
The currently staff are working on a referral which is comparing comparing some of the statistics between food primaries and liquor primaries, and in contemplating in that overall referral are potential locations where there may be more amenable to, if it was to be envisioned to have extended hours for liquor primaries beyond the current 2 a.m. Deadline, where those locations would be. Staff are still working on that location and gathering statistics from agencies such as the RCMP, LCRB, and existing city data sets.
All right,
Just a follow-up.
yep.
Thank you. It says in the report, I believe, that this business already operates until 5 a.m. It just doesn't serve liquor past 12? Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Galanders, that's correct.
So the business is already operating until 5 a.m. and there hasn't been any noise complaints or any issues. So the people that are writing that are concerned, do you think they don't know that it's, I mean, you don't, possibly can't know that, but if they know that it's open until 5 a.m. or not, but it seems like maybe they're not sure because it says they're opposed to the extension of their business until 2 a.m. So maybe they're not aware it's already open till 5. But do you anticipate that serving liquor between, extending it from noon to 2 would increase any of the traffic?
Through the chair to Councillor Galanders, yes, of the 838 letters that were sent out, only 2 came back. One was sort of generic in their opposition to noise. The businesses had been operating there for just under 6 years, and there's never been a bylaw violation or complaint, for that matter, regarding noise. It's entirely possible that the letter writers may not have understood that the business is already operating to 5 a.m. However, the liquor service is only until 12 a.m. currently. It's not anticipated that this particular business will have an issue. There are a number of branches throughout Canada. There's 1,400 locations globally, and there isn't any real profile of any sort of malfeasance or complaints in terms of the public.
Okay, just, do we, sorry, one more. Do we revisit it after a year and see how it's going?
Through the, your worship to Councillor Galanders, staff do revisit these, and staff also put some of these businesses on a liquor kind of primary, food primary inspections that go on roughly every month or so.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you for clearing that up.
Councillor Allen.
Yes, I have a few questions. Now, it's mentioned in the report that they open until 5 a.m. Is it the actual operating hours? Do they really open up to 5 a.m.?
Through your worship to Councillor Howe, yeah, food service provision is till 5 a.m.
Yeah, but I mean, yes, they're permitted to do so, but are they actually operating until 5 a.m.? Because it's quite odd to me that a restaurant of this kind, which is not a bar or something, would operate until 5 a.m.
Through your worship to Councillor Howe, staff have not inspected the premises at 5 a.m. That is what they're advertising.
Okay. My second question is now, I seem to notice that there's a trend. So in the last few months, I think we're receiving more and more this kind of applications. So I wonder whether or not it's the case that, okay, when one gets the extension, the other one will say, oh, well, I better have the same. And then it brings into a trend that, you know, whether or not they need it, they try to get it. Do you notice that kind of trend?
Through your worship to Councillor Howe, there appears to be a bit of pent-up demand that occurred during the pandemic, and certainly what appears to be driving the applications are a desire to meet consumer demand. It may be entirely possible that once one application goes forward, word of mouth spreads, but it appears that there's a bit of a need to make up for a competitive advantage.
Okay. My last question is, okay, if we approve this one, and then, you know, 2 years from now, the restaurant may change hand, so would this automatically carry over, or do you have to, you know, do another kind of application?
Through your worship to Councillor Howe, if the use can continue in that location, as was the case from the previous restaurant that was there, however, there'll still be a need for a new business license application, and we would also be privy to that, or if this was an extension, then that would be a similar trigger for council to give support for that application or withhold that support to the LCRB.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. Reading the report, there have been no noise complaints at this point. One of the letters was worried about traffic Have there been any traffic complaints due to this restaurant?
Through your worship to Councillor Day, there have not been any traffic or parking related complaints for 6 years.
Okay, well, there's not a lot of residential homes around that area, so I can't imagine it'd be a problem. But if for some reason there was outside noise that people could hear, I know that the one over on Highway 99 and Bridgeport, they put their speakers up on little pedestals and then directed the music away from the residential area. Is it set up in such a way that if the noise was a problem for residents, that they could retrofit with something like that?
Through your worship to Councillor Day, the noise bylaw will still be in effect and staff will vigorously enforce that bylaw. If there's anything that can be done to proactively reduce noise complaints, staff work with business owners to do so. And generally speaking, there's compliance.
Okay, all right, I'm not worried about it. Thank you.
Yes, just to keep it in perspective, this is not the karaoke place or anything like that. It's a restaurant. And the trend is society is changing. People are going out, people are staying out later. We want to encourage these businesses to be successful here in Richmond. So I certainly will be supporting this. And Mr. Corrado, correct me if I'm wrong, in answer to the change of business ownership, you would still put, because it's a licensed establishment, the directors of the new company through the rigor of the checks that are required. So it's just not a switch over and automatic.
Through your worship to Councillor Heat, if there's a change in ownership, staff would definitely conduct due diligence checks and work with the RCMP as well.
Thank you. And of note here, this is the one just by the Van City at Westminster, and I believe the SkyTrain is still in operation at that. So, you know, again, this is more is going to come. We're going to get more of these. Let's face it, and that's just the way things are shifting now. And I think whatever we can do to encourage alternative modes of transportation for the people that do consume liquor, whether it's right up till midnight or to 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd appreciate. So I'm certainly in support of this.
Yeah, just quickly here. My question is that there is residential across the street, number 3 road, within 100 meters of it. There's no question, there's actually quite a bit of it. My question is, when is the policy coming? You know, we're getting these one-offs coming one at a time. And we do allow others to go to 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. When are we going to have a policy that we have to judge each one of them and it becomes an equal footing for everybody within the committee? If they're primary or if they're a restaurant, the restaurant can go to 2, or the drinking to 1, whatever it is. So when will that come?
Through the chair to Councillor McNulty, the current council policy is a limiter to 2 a.m. for liquor service. So there isn't a policy impediment to businesses, food primaries or liquor primaries operating until 2 a.m. And nor is there a bylaw that prevents this either. The existing practice is whenever there's a structural change to a liquor primary or a food primary license, the LCRB as a part of the charter requires council endorsement for it. In order for there to be a blanket council endorsement, staff could look at that, but long practice has been on each individual structural change to a food primary or liquor primary, it triggers a report to council.
Okay, I guess my question too is, if we're going to allow businesses like this and the metrics show that there is the demand, then we need to let people know who wish to purchase in the downtown core that there are establishments around this area where you're buying your apartment. We know that, so I think I agree. If we've already got the policy, there's not much we can do if the people have followed the rules to this stage. Do we have any others in the wings that may be coming up?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, there are some more in the wings. Staff are currently conducting due diligence checks with the LCRB and
approximately how many?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, well, I appreciate finding that because, as was said across the street here, that people know that they can do it, they're going to apply, and other than banging their head. But I think the rules have got to be the same for everybody.
Yeah, thank you. It was mentioned earlier about the referral. That outstanding referral is, I think it's called Review of Hours of Operation of Licensed Premises. And it's due to come back Q4 in a report. Question to staff on that is, in that report, will it also include the demand for expanding hours?
Through your worship to Councillor Wolf, staff are not examining the demand. The principal focus of that is to look at the number of concerns and violations that are on record from essentially 3 different data sources, the city's data, police records, along with the LCRB as well.
Thank you. Just my comment then, as this is on the floor. I will not support it. I don't feel I've experienced the call for this demand. From what I've heard, the local casinos, Starlight's being run down and is not utilized much in the evenings at all. And so I recall before the pandemic, it was the opposite, but I don't see the call on us to really expand these hours, so I'm not going to support it. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Those opposed? It's carried with Councillor Wolf opposed. Amendment to the underpinning works. Eric Sperlin, anything to add to your report?
Your worship, nothing to add, available for
If you want
questions.
to go over the road, you got to have a permit or something.
Correct.
Okay, someone want to move it? Moved and seconded. Any comments, questions? Okay, we've got some questions. Councillor Delanders.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think that this is a good idea because sometimes a project will start up and a developer won't have done anything regarding the crane and the trades have to come in and they're delayed dealing with erecting the crane because it wasn't taken care of. So I like a lot of it. I am a little bit concerned about the 12-month expiration. It's mentioned on page GP22 that all permits will expire 12 months following the date. And then it says on the following page that staff have no obligation to renew the permit when it expires. So I just see that as a bit of uncertainty and confusion and not really that practical. A lot of times a crane will go up, it'll be up for at least 2 years, often 3. So what circumstances would it not get renewed after 12 months? The job's well underway. I mean, I just don't know about putting that kind of uncertainty. And I wonder about possibly doing a project-specific timeline for the permit. And this job will probably take 6 months. This job might take 3 years.
Let's hear from staff.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Glanders, yes, the intention is to renew the permits. Again, when the permits start, often the operators wouldn't know how long they would have it, whether it be 1 year, 2 years, or whatever duration.
Yeah, but well, what about where it says that we don't have to renew it?
That's an option to the city, but we would renew the permits.
Normally, they'd be renewed.
Okay,
Right.
as long as you don't, I mean, obviously if there's a huge issue, WorkSafe would deal with it and they would have to come into compliance, but as long as the permits can easily be renewed.
Yes, the intention
Because
is.
that would just be a huge, I mean, the whole project would have to stop and the crane would have to get taken down and be $100,000.
Yes, the intention is to have a very easy renewal permit process.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wolf.
Thank you. A couple questions on this one. Do we have separate bylaws that apply to mobile cranes, like the trucks that have cranes that would potentially swing over sites?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, we do not deal with mobile cranes, so this is just on the tower cranes.
Okay, thanks. And the next question then is, on our top of our 22, the paragraph there mentions that Richmond Fire Rescue and Construction Safety Alliance attend the site and conduct a site inspection. Now, does the site inspection include the full circumference or like perimeter, like the maximum swing area, or just the site under the tower?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, my understanding is about the access to the crane to ensure that the operators have access to and from the crane in emergency.
Okay, thanks. My next question then is in regards to, it mentioned here that should any of the construction cranes swing over private property, that they need to negotiate and enter into private crane swing agreements. Does the city have any role in ensuring that's happening, or managing those, or tracking complaints in regards to that with private property owners?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, no, the city does not get involved in those private agreements.
Thank you. My last, I think, comment then is I appreciate this report, and I've heard many complaints from people who've watched cranes swing in the breeze and go with either snow clumped on them or other things and fall down onto gas stations, onto playgrounds, and even people who work in the mobile crane business, seeing things happening that they know are not accurate, or sorry, not legal. But what's hard to tell for them is if there are those agreements with the private property owners. So the fact that we don't have any role in it, and there's really no way for people to make those complaints, or is there a venue that they can complain to other than directly to the crane itself?
That would be typical with other construction for one property owner to be in contact with its neighboring properties.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much. On page 21, it says that currently the city's bylaws do not require a permit for such activities. Do we require a permit for a crane over just the job site at this point, or not at all?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, currently we do not have a permit for that process.
Okay, do most other cities have these requirements for permits?
I'm not clear on what the other municipalities do, but others do have a similar road use permit.
It did, you know, we've had a couple of cranes in Vancouver fall down and one in Kelowna. Is that what triggered this motion?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, no, this is just a good practice to ensure that we have safety and indemnity insurance in place.
Okay, well, I think it only makes sense. You know, you gotta make sure they're done properly. It's life and death situation out there. Thank you.
All right, let's call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thanks, staff. And the final one is the strategic plan for the library. Susan, we have your report. Is there anything you want to add or highlight?
Nothing further to add, Your Worship, just that I'm really pleased to be presenting this strategic plan. It was shaped by staff feedback and over almost 3,300 responses from the community. So we're really excited, the library board staff and I, to continue the work that we've already started this year to meet some of these strategic goals over the next 4 years.
All right, so this is a report given to us just for information.
Just for information.
Because it is your board that is actually implementing this and formulating it.
That's correct, Your Worship, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
So we want to move receipt for information. Moved and seconded. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thanks very much. A great report. Really appreciate the work that you've put into it. I'm impressed to hear that 3,300 have responded back, and I assume that most of these are all from Steveston area.
Yeah.
Yes, did the Steveston Community Society get actively involved in this, and in what capacity?
Through Your Worship to Councillor McNulty, we didn't specifically engage them as a group, but we did put the survey out to all community members and broadcast it widely to ensure that we had feedback from everyone in our community.
Is this kind of plan going to go to with the rest of our libraries? It's on the forefront and leading the way in library services. So I'm just wondering if you can use the same aspect when we deal with Brighouse itself and Cambie and the other branches.
Sorry, through Your Worship.
Well, what you've laid out here and how you're dealing with the future.
Yes.
You know, what's the future of Ironwood? What's the future of Cambie? What's the future of Brighouse? It's already too small. This is in the leading edge of taking us to the future. It's a compliment.
Yes, thank you. And through Your Worship to Councillor McNulty, this plan is for all of our libraries, so it's for the entire system, not just for Steveston or Brighouse. It's for all 4 library locations and pop-up library services in Hamilton as well.
You didn't say that. And our page 41, I'm just curious about removing barriers and accessibility and the broad form of which you talk about accessibility to library services.
Yeah.
Where are we going with that?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about physical accessibility and some of the different things that we are doing, both with the library sector community right now, but also with the work that we are doing with the City of Richmond around accessibility. But accessibility is also about providing access to our community and removing barriers where they exist. To library card membership, we've already done a lot in that way. As you know, we're fine free, which makes us very accessible. But it's also about promoting more and to more people what we have and what is available to them. Because I know we all hear from people who will say, oh, I didn't know they had that at the library, or I didn't know I could do that, or I didn't know it was free. So it's getting the word out more and using the people that use us already and are proud members of the library to promote this to their communities as well.
Good, well, good job, but we can pat ourselves, you can pat yourself in the back sometimes, but we don't want to be complacent. Keep moving forward. Thank you.
Councillor Day.
Thank you very much. Well, I have to applaud staff. You guys have just done a fabulous job, and I think it says it all on page 38. Library services need to rapidly adapt to this changing environment and identify new ways to promote library services. You have really become a leader, in my mind, of providing this kind of services that people are looking for, and that is changing literally monthly, but somehow you've managed to stay ahead of the curve, so I'm very impressed. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Liu.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for this report. I notice on your, what for us is GP 48, so towards the end of it says commit to environmental sustainability principles and practices. It talks about enhanced tracking and reporting of our carbon footprint. So given that you're inside of city facilities, I'm guessing you're not dealing with the build out or HVAC of the city facility itself, because that would be maybe extra work for no particular reason.
Yeah, and through your worship to Councillor Liu, that's a little beyond the scope of my expertise or my staff's expertise. So that's really where we lean on and work with the city, and it's a city facility. So we definitely look to project development and other departments for that. But where can we take learnings from the city where they're already ahead, and where are the things that we can implement at the library? When I think of paper use, for example, and some of the things that we do there, I'm sure everyone has come to the library and picked up a hold. It's very private. It's wrapped in a big piece of paper. What are some of the new ways that we can respond to that and reduce our footprint in little ways internally as library staff, but also take the lead from the city?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the motion's on the floor. Let's call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you, Susan. Our compliments to your staff. Okay, we're now adjourned. I'll call the closed meeting to order. May I have a motion on closure compliance on the agenda? All those in favor, opposed, carried. We'll wait for the room to close.